Hello, everybody, and welcome to the seventh episode of Beyond Talking Points. On this episode, we're going to talk about a couple things that jumped out to us. We're kind of going to see how this goes because they are interesting pieces with a lot to riff on. Um, so, the first topic we're going to cover is an article from the Daily Beast. No, it's from the Guardian, not the Daily Beast, the Guardian. About just debating and a lot of stuff there. And we're also going to talk about a video that kind of critiques Jordan Peterson. We haven't really discussed what we thought about the pieces with each other, so this can go in a lot of directions, but we're hoping we have a lot to say. So I'm going to quickly kind of summarize the Guardian article right here. So it's titled, if anybody wants to look it up, Who Wins from Public Debate? Liars, Bullies, and Trolls. So that caught my eye. I felt like I had to check that out, see what it has to say. Pretty much the premise of this is debate is a bad medium of exploring ideas. One quote that they pulled out from the text and kind of bolded and made bigger says, "Online, the call to debate is made by men as a way of attacking women with whose opinions they disagree," and it kind of cites it alludes to AOC getting called out by Ben Shapiro. I think that happened sometime last year. It talks about a few other cases. There was one other quote I wanted to pull from here. It takes 30 seconds to make a misleading scientific statement and 30 minutes to refute it. Then that's a quote from George Monbiot. So these are a lot of common sentiments, but the way this article really hits it gets its unique flavor is by essentially painting debate as a masculine form of conversation that benefits people who are liars but are really confident about how they lie. It kind of implies debate is sexist, and it's really an inefficient way of communicating ideas compared to, say, writing articles or books. So I think I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Matthew. I did mention at the top of the show, Beyond Talking Points by Matt and Matthew. So he'll give his first thoughts, and then we're just going to go from there.
Oh, you want me to go first? I see.
Yeah. Well, I want to react to you. That makes it easier for me. I don't even know where to start because I had a bunch of jumbled thoughts. So maybe you'll tell me what what got a rise out of you, and then I can tell you what I think about that.
Fair enough. I think this is a pretty common argument that you hear a lot nowadays. The country's divided. There's so many debates going on, but they're not debates; they're theater. I hear this, I think, all the time from many different sources. I've probably said I've probably said similar things in the past. Who knows? I think I do disagree with the article because I think, well, it's a bit, the article is a bit, it generalizes slightly because I think it's talking about how debate is so destructive in the 21st century, but it's also saying that debate in general is a bad thing, and that debate in general favors, bullies,
Trolls,
and I forget the other one. So, can debate be theater? I mean, can it be two people who are, just out to, get a few laughs or just not taking the issue seriously? Well, sure, I think it can be, but I don't think it has to be. I think I think debate, like actual debate, two people using the, if you'll pardon the phrase, using the dialectic, using the back and forth of, maybe you don't agree on everything, but you have a conversation to try to get somewhere. And debates are basically conversations, just more well-structured, often public conversations.
Okay.
So
So,
that's really my initial reaction.
so that I like that starting point. Those are some good first thoughts on this piece in general. So when I picked this article, you know how a lot of times people just react to headlines now and don't really read articles. And you see a
Yeah.
headline and you decide if you hate it or not. You retweet it based on the headline, or you say this is trash based on the headline. Well, I read this. I mean, I saw the first couple paragraphs about how essentially calling debates sexist, and I was just prepared to absolutely hate everything this stood for. But I've made this comment quite a few times already, and this is a reoccurring trend in the way I think about things. Is there's a lot of truth in things that are even wrong, and I think there's a surprisingly shocking amount of truth in this article, even though I think it goes a little over the top, implying that only liars and trolls win debate, therefore we shouldn't even bother. Um, so I guess the way I would start is I do think debating is a highly flawed medium of communicating ideas. And I never really thought about it that much till I read this. People who are more confident, who are more close, and a lot of people who are more confident are more maybe closed minded, are more likely to succeed in debates because of their the way they say things. They can be very confident and say it. You won't admit any flaws on your side of your argument, which is a bad thing. I like when people honestly acknowledge the trade-offs in their policies, right? You never hear Bernie Sanders say that some people will lose their jobs if the minimum wage is raised to $15 an hour. He won't say that the people whose like their marginal benefit to a company is less than $15 an hour. He won't tell you that those people could lose their jobs, or maybe it'll be way harder to find a job, because that's not how our conversations work, especially in debates. So it highlights this bad way of thinking. Um, Now, then this article kind of jumps into the sexism territory really quick. And I think there's a lot of blatant sexism if you go on Twitter and look at trolls. Like, I'm sure there are people who blatantly don't like women politicians because they're women and think women shouldn't be in power. Those people are actually sexist. But if Ben Shapiro says, I want to debate AOC, I don't see why that's sexist, because he'd also want to debate Eric Swalwell or Cory Booker. I don't think that's purely attack based on their gender. So, like, there's a lot there on debate being flawed. It's just the article kind of, the Guardian really jumps the shark by being like, obviously sexism.
I do agree that debate is certain, and I'll try not to agree too much with you. I promise. A debate can be flawed, and I don't think, I don't think it's an either or conversation. I think many public figures that they who go in who participate in debates, they also give lectures, interviews, have just conversations with people. So I think debate is just one way to communicate with people, or one way to engage with ideas in generally in a public space. It's not the only way. Maybe it's not even the best way, but it is one way.
Can I take this piece as a way to kind of springboard into a thought that I'm just having just now?
Absolutely.
So I think something that scares people who are generally like the IDW free speech types is, once you hear this argument about about debates being, for liars and bullies, you're trying to shut down this kind of conversation, because this author is essentially making the case that debates aren't beneficial, right? The author's essentially saying this is an ineffective way of conversing, because liars and these misleading facts can be thrown out there that you don't have time to debunk, and this and this. And one conclusion I had at the end of this article, though, wasn't that the author was wrong, but can be in any medium. Like, if you read a book and it's written by a partisan hack's going to still put misleading stuff in a book. And if you only read the book, you don't get it debunked for you. So I feel like the author has points, but if you do anything with this information besides being aware of it, you're on a really quick track to censorship. Because really, liars and confidently well-spoken, like, pieces of garbage can mislead you in any of these ways. I don't see why it's unique to debate. So I don't know if that stirs anything in you. But that was just my thought process after kind of piecing things together I got from this.
I remember something else that the article talked about. The article mentioned Socrates a couple times because it mentioned how Socrates was had a bad relationship or had negative opinions of. Sorry, I'm hearing some feedback. Socrates had some negative opinions about the Sophists, which were a group of kind of. I'm trying to think of the word, but maybe sort of public intellectuals before that was a thing. People who and sophists, they routinely debated people, and Socrates thought that they didn't truly debate the issues, that they were just rhetoric, that they were just teaching people rhetoric, and he was against that. He favored I guess actual debate, or I think the dialectic would be, as I said, the technical term. And then it also mentioned how Socrates was anti-writing because you can't, with a person, you can ask questions and say, well, what do you mean? Do you actually mean this? And he said, and Socrates thought, well, from what we understand, from what Plato says, Socrates thought, oh, you shouldn't trust writing because you can't question a book. So I feel like those 2 points are a bit. I'm not quite sure how the author is reconciling those 2 points, because the author's arguing that writing is better than debate, but for some reason they bring up the point that Socrates was anti-writing.
Yeah, like the debate also. So one of the cool parts about debate and conversation is, I think it's more. I guess maybe the term would be like democratized, because people can have a conversation with really anybody. If you're in somebody's presence, you can ask them questions. If you go to an event, you can ask somebody in a Q&A. You can talk to all kinds of people who are essentially proxies for arguments you don't like, because you can ask anybody who holds the ideas. But when you have, and then that's actual debate that you have to have in person in real time, which this is essentially. I mean, the article is specifically talking about big name public debates, but a lot of the points apply to it. If you're talking to me and I'm just more informed on a topic than you, I could win a debate because I can pull more facts out. And that's not impressive because I didn't actually prove anything. I just was more prepared, or something like that can happen. So I can see the issues with that just happening with regular people too. But when it comes to writing, I find it very if two authors, if one author writes a book and another author cites that book in a section and tries to rebut something or refute an argument, that's cool. But it also is like a very heavy on gatekeeping, because you have to generally be in some kind of publication. But if there isn't gatekeeping, then the arguments that come back in writing might also be misleading, just like the arguments this author doesn't like. So it's like, okay, do you want to enforce some kind of gatekeeping to stop this from happening? I'm not sure. And I love listening to audiobooks and podcasts, but because of the medium, I was listening to The God Delusion over the weekend because I had to listen to it in 2 days, or else the library would take it from my phone. So I was listening to that on audiobook, and a lot of the book I kind of agreed with. There are a couple parts though where I was just like, I did not feel like Dawkins made good arguments. But there isn't really any way for me to say, well, Dawkins, what about this on this topic? Like he did a bit on abortion, and he made essentially the Peter Singer type argument for abortion, right? And it's like, I would love to push back on Dawkins about these kinds of questions, but I can't. It's an audiobook. It's written. There's millions of people have listened to it. I can't engage with it in the same way you can in conversation. So there's clearly a utility to be gained from debates and conversation that you can't get from writing. So I find this author is kind of doing what I do when I point out issues with democracy, where I say, look at all these problems. I like being aware of them, yet I don't know of anything we can really do about it at this point, which is kind of disappointing in a way.
I mean, I think to bring an example, maybe to illustrate. I'm not sure how much of a history buff you are, but we have you've probably heard of Cicero, the ancient Roman statesman and philosopher. So we have a lot of his speeches he wrote that he wrote and gave in Roman courtrooms and forums and whatnot. And if you read these speeches, in translation or original, you can tell he is using rhetoric. He is, perhaps glossing over the weaknesses in his own position, or I think in one speech, I think he claims his opponent makes virgins kill themselves. I mean, he says really crazy stuff. So I suppose I might agree with the author in that respect. I mean, I think debate has always been a bit, or it can, as I say, it can divulge into theater and ad hominems. I just think, as I say, that's perhaps that's true, but I agree with you. There's probably not much we can really do about that.
And I totally agree. And the other thing too is I'm a regular listener of the Tom Woods podcast. He's a libertarian. He's a little more out there than the traditional Libertarian Party representative. And he does, every now and then he'll do a solo episode. He usually interviews guests. But on a solo episode, sometimes he'll just take a basic, like essentially a one sentence argument libertarians will hear a lot, and spend about 40 minutes unpacking why that argument's stupid. And that's kind of something this author hits on, about how there can be a 30-second soundbite can take 30 minutes to debunk. But that's not exclusive to debates. Like, people do that when like every stump speech, Bernie Sanders will say healthcare is a right. And for somebody to explain why they think healthcare is not a right, it would take them, several minutes laying down how the view they think of rights, positive rights versus negative rights, and they have to break down why they actually think it wouldn't count. But somebody in one sentence can say that sentence, healthcare is right, which is really just a rhetorical flourish. Even if you kind of agree people should have it, it's like, well, once you start using that language, it's just the rhetoric that's coming out. So, yeah, I think it shows that there's a lot of issues with the conversation in general, and trying to make it as smooth and keep people from being misled. The issue is, though, not a lot of people do their due diligence and fact check things. Like, I read nonfiction books, listen to nonfiction audiobooks. I don't usually dig into the references. I just don't. That's not something that a lot of people do. A lot of people don't flip to the appendix and then look up the sources that they see cited on certain pages. So it leaves a lot of room for error, but that's beyond debates. I think we covered this one pretty good. So maybe if you want to try to break down the video, because I'm not sure which parts we really want to spend time talking about and which parts we're just going to kind of ignore and maybe talk about another time. So maybe you can lead into it and I'll riff off that.
May I add a closing statement to the Guardian?
Yeah, definitely, 100%, always.
I guess one reason I brought up the speeches of Cicero is, I think we also hear this argument against debate. I think is also quite frequently used against lawyers in court. They say lawyers are they're playing a part, and they're you have the defense and you have the prosecutor, and it's basically theater. So that, I think that's another example of how or another way this someone could use this argument against debate. They could apply it in this arena.
That does make me think that this is also, in a way, a very easy argument against democracy, because you can easily transition this about how complex debate could be into how easily people can be misled. And if you're talking about the populace or you're talking about a jury, it's pretty much the same thing. I would be more concerned about the lawyer things if cases actually went to trial nowadays, but that doesn't even happen really ever. But that's interesting. Can be a critique on a lot of things just beyond debate.
So moving on to the other story we want to cover today, I found a video by Philosophy Tube. It's a YouTube channel dedicated to, among other things, philosophy, and to use philosophy to try, or well, really what it is. I've watched some of his videos. He uses philosophy to or he basically just it's a opinion YouTube opinion channel. Sorry, I'm stuttering again. So he basically lays out his philosophy. He teaches a little bit of philosophy on the way, but I think his main thrust is to use or to illustrate his own philosophical, political, and social views. That's fine. I'm not a huge fan of his work, but that's an aside. So the video in question is, as you said, it's a. I don't have it pulled up on at the moment, but it's a critique of Jordan Peterson.
It's called Jordan Peterson and the Meaning of Life. For anybody who wants to look it up, I have it in my tab right there.
Jordan Peterson and the Meaning of Life. Thank you. It's a very, I think it's like a 45-minute video or something. So it's a very long video, and he goes at it. The critique comes at different angles. So the first part of his critique comes down to the question of are morals, the debate between moral relativists versus moral objectivists. Can you have an objective morality, or is morality relative? Is it almost opinion based? And then he touches a little bit on how Peterson uses religion, but he doesn't talk about it that much. The other main part of his critique is a defense of hedonism. Well, I should say he's a Philosophy Tube is also defending more relativism, but he near the end of the video he lays out that the meaning of life, basically, in his view, is to generally seek out pleasure, which is the hedonist position. I wanted to talk about this video because I actually think that his critique, that Philosophy Tube, actually his name is Oliver Thorne, if anyone's curious. Mr. Thorne's critique of Peterson is actually built on a false basis, and I'll try to break down that false basis. Now, I can't say, or I'm not going to argue that I'm an expert on Jordan Peterson, that I know everything about Jordan Peterson's work. So if you think I'm misrepresenting his views, please let me know. But basically, Mr. Thorne's argument is that Peterson is a moral objectivist, that he believes in that there are right and wrong answers to moral questions. And I'm not certain that's true. I think because for example, in the debate between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, he several times, I think, he's brought up the fact that there are multiple ways of interpreting any set of facts. He also, in one interview, I think, or maybe a lecture, I forget, I don't have the clip on me, but he said that postmodernism is right in one respect, in that it acknowledges the difficulty of truth with a capital T. That's what Peterson said somewhere. Again, I could find the video later on. So I don't actually think that is really Peterson's argument. I think he's not. I'm not sure he would argue that there can be objective morality in the sense of scientific objectivity. But I do think he does have opinions. He does think there are right and wrong ways of answering questions of politics and society. I'm just not certain that he's basing that on a belief in moral objectivism.
Okay. So yeah, that's interesting. I I see that a lot because Jordan Peterson talks a lot about building a framework of way of looking at things, right? He says you have an infinite set of facts, but we don't care about the infinite set of facts because there are only so many that are relevant to us. So we only bother perceiving the ones that are relevant, and so forth and so forth. Um, so he does leave a lot of room for relativism or subjectivity to some extent because he says you need to like his view of how to have meaning is to aim yourself at something, right? And then do everything you can to achieve it or at least to work towards that goal. And that leaves a lot of room because everybody is going to have different goals. Everybody's going to want to achieve something different specific to them. He generally says you should be building relationships and doing certain things that are meaningful. But he really is just trying to orient you in the way that you decide based on the subjective views you have. Um, so it is easy when you look at that part of his work to say that he's not an objectivist because a lot of those things rely on subjective interpretations. I don't really think that objective. Well, the whole debate of subjectivity and objectivity is somewhat lost on me. I don't think you need objectivity to ground a lot of the things that Peterson is saying. So because of that, I don't think that Thorne really debunked him here. Thorne just kind of made his own case related to Peterson, right? There's a lot that Thorne did that I wasn't completely in disagreement with, but I didn't really see it as a criticism of Peterson. I think that's kind of where you were standing too a bit. And a lot of the ways that Thorne kind of disagreed with Peterson, I think that it was more verbal phrasing than it was a real disagreement. Because Thorne's definition of hedonism, I'm fine with. I've thought about it a lot, and I think hedonism is typically associated with like hardcore pleasure seekers. It's the people who like do a lot of drugs, sleep around, live it up. That's like the stereotype. And Thorne kind of says that stereotype isn't really true. Hedonism's maximizing your pleasure over your lifetime. That's how I think pretty much everybody acts already. So if you frame it in that way, it's like, well, yeah, people who choose to have families assume they will derive pleasure from raising a kid. They'll derive pleasure from meaning from raising a kid and having a family. So they choose to do that. You can say that's hedonistic. Well, yes, if you define hedonism that way, that is true. That's kind of the weird argument he's making. So he's saying, why doesn't Jordan Peterson just like hedonism then? But hedonism really encompasses everything if you frame it that way. So on one hand, I agree. I'm like, well, yeah, you really should try to maximize your long-term pleasure. That's what I do. That's what I think people should generally do. Does that mean Jordan Peterson's wrong? Well, no, because building meaning in your life and achieving goals and bearing responsibility can derive meaning and pleasure for a lot of people. So, yeah. Now, I don't know how you feel about when he brings up Camus. And at some point, Thorne kind of says, life is meaningless. At least Camus laughs at it instead of trying to be all serious.
I've thought a lot about Camus, yeah.
So how did you feel about Thorne's take on saying, essentially, Peterson, when he acknowledges that there is no meaning if you don't think there's any purpose, instead of being all serious about it like Peterson and trying to make meaning, you should just laugh at it and maximize pleasure?
Can I throw your question back at you? I want to make sure
yes.
I understand. So basically, what Albert Camus was saying was that yes, life is meaningless, but that's okay. We should just live our lives anyway and try to derive as much pleasure as possible or maximize our pleasure throughout our life. So look at it in a sort of a comedic light, whereas Peterson is looking at it in a bit more of a tragic light. He's saying, life is meaningless, life is suffering. I think he says a lot, and that we should orient ourselves toward certain goals. So you're asking me how I thought about what I thought about the comparison, or
Yeah, or yeah, your general thoughts on that too. Like, do you think Peterson is wrong to look at it so tragically? Do you think Camus looking at it right? Do you think they're both fair? I don't know. Go because all you'll give me stuff to work with. So just your first thoughts on that whole dichotomy.
I I'm only pausing because not because I haven't thought about it, but I want to. I guess I suppose what I would say is I'm not sure that the Camus view and the Peterson view are completely mutually exclusive. Um, I think I think life is. I think meaning derives from people, so I don't think, generally speaking. So yes, I mean technically speaking, if we're having a philosophical conversation, is there meaning in the world? Like, is this something we can find? The way we can find bacteria with a microscope? No. But can life be very tragic and is there a lot of suffering in life? Yes, there is. So I suppose I know you say you don't respect moderate positions, but I guess I fall somewhere in the middle.
No, I actually like what you said there. Certain topics I don't respect moderate positions on because I think a lot of moderate positions are somewhat contradictory a
Mm.
lot of the time, especially when it comes to policy. But when it comes to this kind of thing, I think it's the hint of truth in everything, right? I think sometimes we take life too seriously, which is why the absurdist vision makes sense. Sometimes you should be able to stop and laugh at things. But to bring it back to the original question of like say meaning, um, I'm pretty secular in the way I think. I was raised as a Christian until I was like 4. So yeah, like I don't have a strong religious background, and at some point I was really down on the world really having any kind of meaning. Um, I find some arguments for like quote unquote God, interesting. Like the unmoved mover is an interesting argument, but the whole Christian meaningful God that cares about you individually and loves you hasn't really spoken to me ever. So coming away from that, it's easy to end up thinking life is meaningless in a cosmic sense. I was listening to I'm going to randomly name drop Dave Rubin because he interviewed I want to say Peter Boghossian. He randomly in like the last 2 minutes, I think Dave asked him for like what advice he would say to young people. I'm hoping that's the right guess, or else I'm giving him unfair credit. But he said something along the lines of he didn't like holding unverifiable or unfalsifiable beliefs. So anytime he held a position, he would think, what evidence could be given to me that would make that statement now untrue? So when I sit here and I say life is meaningless, well, then it raises the question, what could even exist that would make my life have meaning? Is the thing that makes it meaningless the fact that I don't think there's a loving creator? Is that the requirement, or could there be meaning in another way? Maybe I'm looking at it in too short of a sided way. Maybe you can think of meanings in other ways. So that's when things like Jordan Peterson talking about meaning um, comes in, because he pretty much is saying create your own meaning, have goals, orient yourself in the right way. Camus just admits essentially there is no meaning because he looks at it, I think, and probably I would guess the more cosmic sense. So it's maximize pleasure, but maximizing pleasure in itself could be meaning to some people. This is where I get really subjective and relative, and I'm like, it depends on the individual. The individual has, you have your own mind, you have your own things you want. So I don't think they're in contradiction at all. I think you're right to stake out a moderate position. There are definitely certain times in life where, for whatever reason, it should be seen tragically and deathly serious. Because there are times where, like, you're in a horrible situation. If you're living on the street, you probably shouldn't be laughing because you're probably in pain. You have nobody who loves you. You have no relationships because that's why you're homeless. Like, that sucks. That's tragic. But then there are times where, like, you do something stupid and it really isn't that big of a deal in the greater scheme of things. Like, oh, you go on a date and you're like a young guy and you do something really dumb and it goes bad. It's like, yeah, that's embarrassing, but in the end, you're still like 20. It's not the end of the world. laugh about it, get over it. So that there's a time for all these kinds of like, you know, you can sit back and be like, screw it. Most stuff isn't that important. And there are times to be serious. It really depends. So that's why I think both of them have an interesting message, and that's why I like philosophy. You get these two very different, distinct things that can resonate at different times of your life. I would say that this is why I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, is you can clearly see that his message is hitting people with that haven't taken enough responsibility in their own lives, and they need it. So the message that he has resonates with a lot of people, maybe not because he's saying things that are necessarily super highly intellectual, but they resonate because it's the kind of direction people need, and it has a lot of truth in it, even if you think there are problems. And that's why I'm a pretty big defender of him, even if I don't even see the world that tragically at this point in my life. So yeah, I don't know what you want to do with that rant.
Oh, there's a lot to go in. I mean, there's a lot to go into it with your rant. I think I guess the direction I'll take it in is, I guess, my general what my general critique of Jordan Peterson would be. After having said that somebody else gave a false critique, I guess I need to I need to explain, what my critique would be. And I think I've said this on one previous episode, but I agree with Peterson maybe 50% of the time. I think his criticisms of the far left, of social justice warriors, I'm sure I agree with almost all of them. His criticisms of academia, his criticisms of people, his criticisms of the left's tendency at this point, or at least in this country, well, actually not in this country, globally, in Europe and North America, to shut down debate. I think that's ridiculous. I'm sure we're in complete agreement on that. And I'm also in complete agreement with him when he is criticizing, I guess, to put it in simple terms, that the radical feminists, the people that are constantly complaining about patriarchy, and how, was it like 20? They say women earn 25 cents to the man's dollar, or 75 cents. I think it's 75 cents. What they say. I agree with all this. I think generally feminism has worked. So I think in the Western world, broadly. So I think there are still some feminists who don't want to acknowledge that, and feminists who play identity politics. His criticisms of identity politics, I also completely agree with. So it sounds like I agree with him on so much. What is my issue with Jordan Peterson? I just disagree on how he thinks we should derive meaning. That's really my core disagreement with him. I think he puts too great an emphasis on religion and tradition than I think should be. I think he gives religion and tradition too much credit. I think I know why he. I mean, I know why he makes that argument. I think, to name drop another philosopher, I think he's very much aligned with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau was alive during the Enlightenment. He in his early life he was kind of he was a philosophe. He was just one with the times. But then he broke away with the Enlightenment. He started criticizing the Enlightenment. He said, no, we need to go back to religion. We need to go back to simpler times. We need to, this cosmopolitanism, this shallow intellectualism. I think, I don't know how Rousseauian Jordan Peterson thinks his argument is, and I'm not saying he would agree with everything that Rousseau stood for, but I think that's really his broad argument. It's an attack on Enlightenment values generally, and I just disagree with that. I think that our Enlightenment heritage, it's not perfect, and we need to add to it. We need to build upon it. But I think the Enlightenment's criticisms of the state and religion and tradition, I think, were completely justified. And I think I'm almost done. if we throw them out, and let me say one more thing. I'm not saying that Peterson wants to go back to pre-Enlightenment times. I want to make that clear. And I'm not even saying he's completely anti-Enlightenment, but I think he's certainly suspicious of the Enlightenment's influence. And I think he's wrong to be suspicious.
Okay, so I don't
I
call
hope I gave you a cogent answer.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask for clarification on a couple things, just because I don't want to misinterpret you if I go on a rant about my disagreements with what you said. So you started off saying that you don't like Jordan Peterson predominantly because he endorses religion and traditional values, and because he's in some ways anti-Enlightenment. So can you? I guess we'll come back to the Enlightenment part later. Well, let's talk about the religious and traditional values. Can you unpack what you mean by that when you say he endorses it? Because the things that come to mind for me, I don't think he's actually endorsing. So I think that might just be a misread of him. But I want to know what you think he's doing, so maybe I can unpack what I think he's doing instead.
What I mean when I'm referring to, I mean, religion is pretty obvious. I think you're more. Are you so you're confused of how I'm using the word religion as well as tradition, or is it more the tradition?
I'm not under the impression that he is endorsing people literally pick up religion. He uses religious texts to explain, human like his first book, Maps of Meaning, is exploring traditional stories to just elaborate on a general set of values to derive from the stories. But he never explicitly says that he endorses people acting religiously. He just says you should act on this way based on some stories, right? So I don't think Yeah.
I think I see what you're getting at. Am I saying that he's explicitly saying, you should be a Christian? No, I'm not. But what I'll come back to the tradition in a moment. When I say he's endorsing religion, what I mean is he believes, I think, that we should not throw out religious tradition completely. He thinks that there is value in religion. He thinks that the stories that religion tells us are psychologically significant, and that if you disregard the psychological significance of Judeo-Christian values generally, that you get Stalinist Russia, that you get that you get nihilism, I guess, really is what he's afraid of. He's afraid that you get nihilism, and that he believes that in a sense nihilism is completely rational, and that if we allow ourselves to what I mean by that is I think I forget what school shooter he was referring to in some lecture, but he said, or maybe he was in a book. Anyway, he said something to the effect of, yeah, life is meaningless. Life is suffering. Or I think he was talking about a manifesto written by some school shooter. He said, yeah, it's perfectly rational. I mean, what he says, it makes sense logically speaking. So he thinks that, he thinks that the new atheists and people like Sam Harris, that was redundant, but you know what I mean, that they are too rational in a sense, that they put too great an emphasis on rationality.
Okay.
Does that, am I making sense? I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, okay. I get what you mean.
I'll say one more thing. As for tradition, you asked about the tradition. I think he believes that I don't want to say he believes in 1950s values, because that would be simplistic. But he certainly believes that, monogamy is necessary. He certainly he believes that monogamy is necessary. He certainly believes in the sanctity of marriage. He believes in the in the necessity of this isn't exactly the phraseology I want, but he kind of believes in the, you gotta take, you gotta pull yourself, out of your rut. You gotta take responsibility for your own, screwed up life, and make something of it. So I think that I think that is really what I mean when I say he broadly is defending tradition and religion.
Okay, so there's that. I appreciate the clarification. That gives me a lot more to work with, and so I'm more confident that I'm not misrepresenting you. One thing that this is my reading of it. I've read both his books. I've listened to a lot of hours of his stuff. So I think maybe you're linking the religious stories to some of his other work, like his first book is purely religious stories and ancient stories and extracting meaning from it. Maps of Meaning does this at times, but Maps of Meaning is a lot more of an anti-authoritarian screed. I don't think the anti-authoritarianism that he worries about is necessarily as inherently linked with the religious part, because the religious part's a lot about the individual, right? So, and he said this in one of his Sam Harris debates. He says that he's worried that the new atheists want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So the new atheists say, like, well, all this stuff is clearly a bunch of silly tribal stuff. We need to ignore all of it because it's all, based on this ridiculous premise. And then Peterson says, well, okay, but before we act like it's all useless, let's at least acknowledge that there are some good things to be learned here, and they actually are somewhat representative of all of human history, and maybe some of the good actions as opposed to the bad actions. Like there is stuff to be drawn from some of the biblical stories. Like, I love when he talks about Genesis. I think it's really insightful. I think it's interesting to look at the Bible like it's a piece of literature and break it down. And you look at some of the tropes, and it's an artistic way of looking at the Bible. And I think it's fascinating. But some people are like, well, the Bible's a load of trash because there's no reason to believe in this kind of loving God. There's no reason to buy into creationism for these reasons. So throw it all out. And I don't like that mindset. So how we look at his the way he talks about religion, and then bring that into, like, say, the Soviet Union and nihilism. I don't think. Okay, so I think nihilism, he's concerned with it because he thinks it's a slippery slope. So he thinks that if you start from the premise of nihilism and there's no meaning, then it's not hard to end up, like the Columbine shooters. That's who he talked about. And it's not hard to end up like the Soviet Union and things like that in the Gulag Archipelago. He thinks it's a slippery slope to that because nihilism and concern without meaning, and then if you don't have rooted moral values that are mostly agreed upon, then you can quickly end up not regarding people who aren't on your team. So that I think that's where most of his concern comes from. I do think I see what you say about him being a traditionalist. I think that's partially good, partially bad, right? I think there's some reasons to support individualism, which is something that his books are all about. It's about finding your individual meaning and shooting for it, or individual as in the small unit of family. But like the critique we listened to on Philosophy Tube, he pretty much said that this is how he sidesteps Marxism, is by essentially devaluing groups getting together and acting. I think Jordan Peterson doesn't have a problem with people finding group meaning as long as it's not authoritarian in nature. If a business had a tight knit culture, like we talked about Ray Dalio on like the first episode. I listened to his audiobook. His company has ridiculous culture. They work in a tight knit group for a common goal, and it's very organized, and they all work really hard together. Jordan Peterson would not have an issue with that company, but I think he'd have an issue with, say, like the Soviet Union uniting for a goal and then being willing to run people over in the process. So do I think Jordan Peterson's overly conservative in a traditional sense? Like he's not willing to abandon values that he sees doing mostly good historically? Yeah. Um, yeah. And I'm not very conservative in that sense personally. I'm really not. But I think he has some good points that should be reckoned with. I don't think he's, straight out wrong from wanting to salvage pieces of religion. Um,
Can I jump in here?
yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I,
I
I don't want to.
exhausted that.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
Well, again, as I said, I mean, I agree with him 50% of the time. So I don't. I'm not saying you're saying that I'm completely dismissing him, but I just want to make it clear. I'm not. I treat him as somebody to be reckoned with. Somebody to. I listen to his arguments. I think he's a very intelligent man. Again, I just. When it comes to reading the Bible as literature, I don't have a problem with that, reading the Bible as literature. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that religion has a lot of aesthetic value, meaning there's a lot of literature, poetry, music, and paintings and sculpture that derive from religion, or that they were inspired by religion, and that they might not have been created without that particular influence. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's obvious. I admire. I respond to religious poetry and to religious paintings the way anybody else does. I think my distinction would be that historically speaking, religion has not just been about literature. Religion has, if throughout history almost all the religions had just been, hey, all this stuff is just metaphor. Just look at this stuff more as art and more, read it metaphorically. Don't take it literally. Would I be as vehement in my attack against religion generally? No, I wouldn't. But it's the fact that. And I think really my position is actually far more nuanced than it might seem when I say I'm part of the new, or I believe most of what the new atheists say. But we can talk about that. We can go more into more detail another time. But I'll just end with this. The reason I attack religion so much is because I know what religion is capable of once it gains power. If you look at, I mean, I don't even have to, give examples of how there's terrible things people have done in the name of religion. I mean, when I say that, people already have, 15 examples in their head. and so that would be, that is why I am so that's why I'm so absolutist in this respect, because when religion is given the opportunity, it does horrible things, and I think we have to continuously criticize it to keep people aware of what it can be capable of.
So just for me to talk about that last thought there is for me, it's about the frame of reference. So, like, on one hand, you can say, here are the bad things done in the name of religion. And it's like, okay, well, what should I compare that with? If I should compare it with all the bad things that happen in names of things that are not religious, then it's like, then that's a different frame of reference than just comparing it against nothing, right? Because you can point at, say, like, and then it comes down to, well, how do I decide what counts as somebody doing something evil in the name of religion? Because some people think Hitler was an atheist. He wasn't. He was a Christian, right? Hitler, in some speeches, cited things that were Christian in nature in order to rile people up against Jews. Now it's like, did Hitler do all his actions out of religious faith, or did he just cite it sometimes because he knew it would get more people on his side, and it's a political, I mean, it's a rhetorical flourish. So I find it hard to hash out. Like some things are obviously more in the name of religion, but then also even when it comes to radical Islamic terror, some parts are just like, well, do we know if this person had people he loved get killed by military forces from the West? It's like because it's easy to go, okay, well, this person said Allahu Akbar, and they were, trained by people who were Islamic radicals, but did they buy into it because of another reason? So I think there's a lot more gray in there, and I'm not comfortable attributing so much negative to religion because there's a lot of natural reasons that are outside of religion for a lot of things to happen. Even things like the Crusades, people have chalked up a lot of other parts of that due to trade elements in the era. So it's like I have this hard time blanket blaming religion when sometimes it's you use the religion devoutness as an excuse by, say, a political leader, he cites it to go to war. And then it's a religious war, but then it's also there were other reasons and other undertones. So that's why I have a lot of gray there. Even with all that said, though, since Jordan Peterson does essentially preach in a secular way, even if you think those historical elements should make religion unfathomable, he's doing it in a way that says, I'm not even touching that part. So I think what he's doing is fine because he's looking at it like art. And if you think, well, looking at it like art is fine, then you should give Peterson a pass, and then everyone else, maybe not. Since we're approaching an hour rapidly, I'm going to give you a chance to do your last thought. I'm not going to respond because I'm going to mute myself and go and pee because I've been holding it for about 30 minutes. So you can air out to the audience a 3 to 5 minute answer, and I'll come back in, I'll hear you out, and then I'll close out the show. Does that sound good?
Sounds like a plan. So to give his 3 to 5 minute answer that he requested, I mean, I hear this. I don't know how he would feel about this. I feel like that's just, very he's giving very common, apologetics for religion. How do you know they did it in the name of the name of religion? Religion. I'm not saying he's saying these exact words. I'm paraphrasing the general argument he's giving because, as I said, I've heard it said by many, many different people. How do you know something's done in the name of religion? How do you know that religion is the problem? Maybe religion isn't the problem. Maybe it's human nature. Maybe it's just people. Maybe people do terrible things, and you cannot say, oh, it's religion because it's just people. And I just don't. I really don't buy that argument because, I mean, yeah, of course, we all know people can do horrible things. I don't deny that, and you don't have to be. You don't have to be religious to do horrible things. But I think that. Sorry, I'm having a sudden brain. My brain stopped working.
It would be unfair of me to disagree with you since I missed a minute of what you did say, so I'm going to agree with what I caught there. You could pin down plenty of situations where, like, Sam Harris will say, like if Sam Harris heard what I said, he'd give.
I remember what I was going to say.
Okay, go ahead then.
Sorry. Yeah. I really want. I've asked a lot of people this, and I haven't come up with a good answer yet. Find me the, secular humanists that are preaching, that homosexuality is a sin, or that, that are bombing, or that are bombing, subways. Find me people who believe in secular values, who are doing these sorts. The kind of destruction that a religious person is doing, you just can't find it anywhere. And So, I don't think, I do, I'm very protective of the religious pluralism that the United States has, so I don't think the government should say, all religions should be banned. If you believe in a religion, you should be, dragged out into the street and shot. I'm not that kind of person, or that I don't believe that is legitimate. If a government were doing that, I would be speaking out. I would be the first person speaking out, because people have the right to believe what they want, and people have the right to come together as a community, as a group, and a group of people who believe, in X, Y, and Z, and worship, or do whatever they want, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. So I'm not authoritarian. And I'm not going to add. You would never hear me say that all religion should be banned or destroyed.
Okay, wait. I just have to say something. So you threw out that line, like, find me the secular humanist who'll do this and this. That's what I was saying, where I was saying you have to have a framework of comparison. If you're saying I should compare all the religious actions that were clearly in bad faith based on religion to what good faith secular humanists who identify as secular humanists do, it's like, well, yeah, the people who decide that they're secular humanists are like the nice atheists who are like, we should build a community around being secular. But like Ted Bundy didn't kill people because of a religion. He killed people because he was crazy. So it's like, well, he wasn't doing it based on religion. So does that mean his actions were inherently secular? It's like, I don't know.
No.
So you have to, you can't just say there's the religious and there are the people who are willingly, specifically declare themselves not religious. You have to think like, well, are we comparing all the religious violence in the world compared to, say, wars that have no religious nature at all? That's why I have a problem with the whole calling religion evil. I don't know what to compare it against. And I'm not satisfied with just saying secular humanists is what we compare.
No. I think we're talking at cross purposes a bit. I don't know how much longer you want to go. I'll just say a few more words, and then you can wrap up the show. Well, no, let me try to be a bit more nuanced in what I say. What I mean by that is, find me the person, find me the group of people who are skeptical, who find me the group of people who are they have the capacity for critical thinking. They have the capacity for empathy. That they have they find value in such a way as to not prescribe for everybody else, but they're saying, well, this is what I think, and that they're willing to have conversations, they're willing to have debates and discussions like the one we're having. Find me the person who lacks tribalism, who I'll put it like this: you can find there are horrible things you can find done in the name of religion, and there are the good things that people say have been done in the name of the religion of religion can be done by secular people. The bad things that are done in the name of religion cannot be done by secular people. So,
okay, we'll leave it at that. Well, I'm sure that every time we talk about this stuff, I'm finding that I'll listen to like new atheist stuff and I'll be like kind of but I won't feel that strongly about it. And then when I hear you say the arguments in real time and I can push back, all of a sudden it lights a fire under me I do not expect. But I'm not going to push back on that because we are over an hour and I'm not going to get crazy. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. If you got through it, feel free to check out our backlog. We have 6 other episodes, so we got hours of conversation like this already, and we're making more and more. You can follow me on Twitter at MattKeckBlog. You can follow my buddy here on YouTube. If you type in the Anti-Philosopher, he uploads our If you're listening to this on podcast, he uploads the video so you can see how expressive I get while he's talking and I'm muted, maybe, or you can see me hustle to leave my room. You could even see the Sharknado 2 poster that's behind me right now, which I forgot to cite during our conversation on life not being so serious. I really had the great opportunity there, and I didn't take the chance. So yeah, everybody, thank you so much. With that, signing off, Matt and Matthew.